What's up, guys, and welcome to the Mark and Matt Show. I'm Matt, and today we're going to go through a little bit of the Jon Moxley interview that just took place on Talk is Jericho. What I want to do is just go through some of the highlights and really just my thoughts and opinions on how the interview went. It was really interesting to hear Moxley's take on everything backstage. Frankly, it seemed like it confirmed for a lot of us what we thought it was like backstage. And the interview covers a lot of Dean's time for his comeback when he was injured, leading up to his comeback, and then actually fighting Rollins, going through that feud at the end, the whole gimmicks with him in the doctor's office. It was really telling. It was really interesting to hear how he thought Vince is completely out of touch and is perpetuating everything. But he did say that he had, best time there, best friends there. But it was time for him to go, and it didn't matter how much money they threw at him. At the end, he was going to go. Crazy interview, really fun to listen to, but I want to touch on some of the key highlights. Let's go. So for Moxley, he feels like a big weight has been lifted off his shoulders. So I'm pulling some of the condensed notes and everything from the Torch, from pwtorch.com, and they talk about it. So some of the quick notes and highlights are that on leaving WWE, he felt like a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders. When he was the face of SmackDown, when he did his initial run there, I guess as WWE champion is what they're talking about. Moxley talked about being the lead good guy on SmackDown, and how the writing team wanted him to talk about what he did during the day, and then there are things a cool guy would do. But instead, he felt they were something an idiot would do. He told the writer to change it, and the writer came back and Vince put it all back in. Moxley said that he had to go to talk to Vince, and Vince said, "Oh, it's such good shit. This is the reason people like you." Sorry, that's just my bad Vince impersonation. I think we all know how Vince, in our minds, how he sounds. That part I find is really interesting because in the interview, he talks more with Jericho about this, that he would have to constantly go to Vince's office and he'd be handed a script, whatever the scene was, the backstage thing and the skit, and then you have to go to Vince, talk about how he didn't like it, how it didn't make sense. And it seems like based on the interview and what he said, that a lot of times Vince would come back and just tell him that, this is who you are, and this is just such good shit. And he would kind of spin it a bit. And Moxley talks about how he would have to work through that. Sometimes, they'd be able to tweak it a bit, and other times you have to go with it. But there are certain things that he was supposed to do that he just couldn't go through with. One of them was this thing on the pooper scooper. So on a pooper scooper being used as a prop in one of the one of the scripts. Moxley says, quote, "This is a $1 billion company run by a man that's allegedly a genius, and keep in mind, we're all adults and we're all talking about stuff like this." On knowing he was done with WWE after Vince had him do a skit where he got inoculations to protect him against the fans, he said, quote, "It's just more of this carrot top prop comedy," he told Vince. "And if this is what you want on this show, I'm the best man for the job." So Moxley was kind of going into how Vince just always pegged him as a prop comedy and prop gimmick guy. And he would tell Moxley things like, "Well, this is who you are." And it really, really sheds a light on that Vince pins these guys and slots them in as this is your character. This is who you will play, the role you will play. And I think even Triple H has said that in previous interviews or press conferences where he has spoken about how people have a role to play kind of on the show. But the problem is that it stifles creativity and they're not allowed to do anything that they really want to do. So a guy like Ambrose or Moxley could have done maybe 20 different things. And to his point, when he was off on injury, he had 20 different ideas that he was ready to go with. And he says in the interview how he kept thinking about this. He was going through rehab. He was training. He was watching old videos. He was watching new stuff from Impact, Ring of Honor, New Japan, WWE. He was getting all these fresh ideas and things he wanted to do. And then he would just stop because he would say, they'll never let me do it. They'll never let me do it. So it shows us how much of a box WWE seems to put on their guys and girls when it comes to the creative side. And Moxley even talks about how there is two writers' camps. One that's in Stamford, and he referred to it, and I'm loosely paraphrasing, that it's political and closed off, and they don't really work with the road crew of writers. And then you have the TV crew that have their own ideas, and it's this big jumbled mess. When Jericho asked him on his relationship with working with Vince, he says, "We're Mentos and Diet Coke. Me and Vince together create this explosion of goofy nonsense that I detest." And I couldn't get over just how much Moxley was talking about how he hated all of this. And you think back, guys, of all the years that Dean has been on TV. When he was in The Shield, he was the main guy. He was the main guy for promos. Roman was always in the background, and they were grooming him to be who he is today. Seth, in my opinion, when first watching The Shield, I thought Seth was really good, but he didn't really stand out as much. Dean, I always pegged as like, oh, well, he's the leader of The Shield because he did all of the promos, all of the talking. Roman and Seth were in a tag team, and Dean had the U.S. title, even though he never defended it and did nothing with the U.S. title. He still had it. So it felt like Dean was the main guy. But then once the Shield was kind of done and they all broke off and he went into SmackDown and he worked on Raw, everything was gimmicked. Everything was a prop. Everything was just goofy, in his words. And it's just what Vince had pegged for him. So it really, really gets interesting and makes me think about how many of these people are backstage, handed a script, they hate it, and they just have to go with it because they've been slotted as, this is your character, this is what you do, and you better do it this way. And to Dean's point, and some of the talk and stuff you read online always sounds like, and even Vince and Triple H do interviews, and even ex-wrestlers or legends will talk about how, you get a script, you don't like it, you go to Vince, and you got to stand up. And guys like Triple H or Vince will say that young wrestlers today don't stand up, don't grab the brass ring, and they don't really go for it. But it sounds like a guy like Dean, who seemingly had a lot of stroke in the company, the ability to go to Vince, to have his ear, to talk to him, he would still get shut down no matter what it was, because Vince just had it in his head that this is the way we're going to go. I don't know. It was really interesting. It continues on with just a few more points on what he said to Vince when he told him he was leaving WWE and his contract was up. He says, quote, "Every Monday I got a physically sick feeling in my stomach and I can't live like that." He talked a little bit more in the interview about how, he didn't even open up the final offer, the contract offer that Hunter and Vince gave him before he left. He didn't want to know. And that it could have been $10 million was the contract offer. He wouldn't have taken it because he just was unhappy. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of right now. When you have people like Sasha Banks, the Revival, Gallows and Anderson, you have a lot of different people seemingly unhappy that are not at least creatively fulfilled. And WWE is in this spot right now where they're trying to just grab every single star that's out there and put them under contract, but they have nothing for them. And the sad thing is, and Moxley talks about this in the interview too, is that WWE has like the best roster to date, hands down, the best athletes ever. And they're in this spot where there's nothing creative for anybody. It's just rinse and repeat. Unless you're Brock Lesnar, and then Vince feels like he can kind of put his stamp on it to say that Brock's his guy and his attraction. Otherwise, these guys are just going week to week, putting on, in a lot of cases, really excellent matches on TV, but there's no creativity for their character. Even a guy like Kevin Owens or Sami Zayn can do so much. And even this past week on SmackDown, Kevin Owens comes out, does a standard promo, and that's kind of it. it doesn't feel like they can really do anything and express themselves because everything is so scripted. It's so by the books and by the numbers. And this is what gets really exciting, I think, for a lot of us as fans, is that we see an opportunity with AEW where we can get behind that if these guys and girls can actually perform at the level they want to and be creative with their characters and try different stuff, because that's what we want. We want to see the best matches, but we also want compelling creative storytelling. And we're not getting that on Raw and SmackDown right now. And it seems really obvious when Ambrose or Moxley goes through everything. On his goals with AEW, the Jericho asked him, and Moxley says that if I had a goal with AEW, it's we can prove Vince ways sucks. And he goes on to talk about how it's not so much that he's trying to get into a war with Vince and that they should be doing that. It's just he wants to prove that their way doesn't work. The way they script, the way they run it doesn't work anymore. And that's what he wants to do with AEW, with his role. The last thing was the most interesting, and I laughed. I listened to the show in my car, and I was driving, and he drops the line that Jericho asked him, like, for that last appearance that he did with The Shield. And WWE hyped it up as a big network special, the last time, for the last ride of The Shield. And it was on a house show. I watched the event because it was a 1-hour house show, and like Finn Balor was on there, a couple other guys. It was all built for this main event. And the last appearance, Jericho asked him like how much he got paid for it. And Moxley says, "You know how much I got paid for the last house show with the Shield special?" Said Ambrose, $500. That's what you get just to show up at Raw, the bare minimum. I think it's what extras get. So Ambrose on his way out, he was talking about how he wondered if he was getting heat put on him or he's getting buried for, by the time he said to Vince and to Hunter that he was leaving, if now he was going to get buried. Because remember, he did a segment with Nia Jax before, and he worked with EC3 for like 2 matches. And right around the time it was coming out that Ambrose was leaving, he started to get into this random weird program with Nia Jax, where Nia was going to fight him, basically. And Ambrose even talks about this, how it was potentially going to lead into a program, a storyline. And he said, he's like, I have no problem taking a bump for Nia. He says, I like Nia. We did a bunch of stuff backstage. We worked on some stuff for this angle. He's like, I would be all for it in the right circumstances, but it felt like it was more towards, let's bury this guy as he's leaving. And as we saw, nothing ever came of it, and obviously he left, but nothing ever came of the storyline. They never really did anything with it between him and Nia. I actually think it would have been fun creative if they did something, but it doesn't seem like that's what their intention was at all. And then he had like a 2-minute match where he got rolled up by EC3. They had another match right after, I think like the next week or so on Raw, and that ended quickly too, and then that was over. And since then, we've never really seen EC3 in a match on TV. He's been in backstage segments as much of a background character, doesn't talk, doesn't do anything. So a guy like that, they just don't even use, or they don't even see any value in. But yeah, Ambrose got paid $500 for his final appearance in the Shield. For a guy who worked that long, they paid him the bare minimum of just showing up on TV to get that final show out of him and then send him off, and he was gone. But it was weird too, because they did, and he talks about this in the interview, WWE posted on WWE.com that he was leaving, that his contract is expiring, and that he was done effective whatever date. And it's the first time ever they have proactively gone out and actually put that out themselves. And it clearly looks like it was just trying to control the narrative for it. But a really weird thing for them to do, because usually it's just best of luck in your future endeavors when they're released and they don't acknowledge anything. And this was the first time they actually went through and they mentioned that he was leaving, and they gave him like a run. I know they, quote, buried him a little bit on his way out, but he was still on TV every week. He was doing the final round, like the final go home with the Shield. They were using him actively on TV. So I think the whole thing was just really, really bizarre. The thing that stuck out to me the most out of the whole interview was Vince's attitude towards him. And I've already talked about this, but just how he put him into this box of being a prop wrestler. And this is what's always turned me off about Ambrose as a viewer for years, is that I've seen moments on Raw and SmackDown where he's come out, music hits, goes to the ring, he's all business, he wants to fight. And I've seen little glimmers of that where I'm like, oh, this guy, there was one time, probably right after he broke up with the Shield and he was kind of on his own shortly after, but where I actually thought, I was like, oh, this guy is has potential to be a Stone Cold type of character. I don't mean on the level of Austin, but just in terms of his no nonsense, no BS, badass, I'm here to fight, kick your ass and get out. Wearing jeans and tank top, leather jacket, just in and out, just business. And that really started to appeal to me. But then they did stuff. And remember, he had the match with Brock and it was all props and gimmicks. And he had a red wagon and it was garbage. That's the stuff that I just shook my head at. I was like, I can't stand this. And he seemed overly quirky. And I know he is like a quirky character in himself, with his mannerisms and how he presents. But it clearly just seems like it was so much of the system just weighing on him and he couldn't take it anymore and he was done. And it's too bad because they lose a quality guy, but we reap the benefits because now we get to see him in a new environment like AEW. We saw him come out. We saw him interrupt or at the very end and do the surprise with Kenny Omega and Jericho at Double or Nothing. I thought that was just tremendous. And to time it out with that and then the interview to really understand it, I think it gets fans even more invested behind the character to know what he was going through and where he's been and what he's going to be doing. And he's got more shows that he's going to do on the way to AEW in that full time. But I think he's going to be a centerpiece. I was kind of worried or wondering like how are they going to use Moxley in AEW and how he would get across with the fans. But if this is any indication, I think we should be pretty hopeful. And I think this is great news for him. And it's great news for us as fans to see that we can get a quality character coming out of the system, and AEW is starting to look better and better. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. How do you think Moxley interview went with Jericho? Was there anything you disagreed with? What was your take on all of it when it came to like Vince and talking about how this is who you are and this is your character? And what are your thoughts on AEW and Moxley being there, and where do you think we're going with everything? Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Next up, I'm probably going to be doing Super Showdown recap and review. You'll see that afterwards. I'm debating on actually going through with watching the show or not. I haven't decided yet, just because of it being in Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of heat around that, so I'm not too sure. But I will be doing a predictions episode right after this, so stay tuned. Keep checking in. Make sure if you feel like it and you like any of the content, feel free to just hit the subscribe bell, notification bell too. And we'll check in with you guys next time. See ya.